Some secrets are intended to ruin families. Mary Brown's hands shook as she entered the courtroom, the tension of years of suspicion bearing down upon her chest, like some unsustainable weight. Each step weighed upon her, as if the very floor beneath her knew the tempest she bore within. Today wasn't just another routine hearing. This was the day that the truth, long buried beneath layers of lies and half-truths, would finally be revealed. Mary's heart pounded in her ears, echoing like a relentless drumbeat, while the hum of the courtroom seemed almost deafening. Cameras flashed at the edge of her vision, capturing her every move, while whispers rippled among the spectators, carrying curiosity, judgment, and the tension of anticipation. Mary's eyes scanned the room carefully, noting every familiar face. Family members sat in silence, some looking uneasy, others feigning calm. But Mary knew that behind those neutral expressions lay a storm of emotions: shock, disbelief, maybe even guilt. Around the courtroom she had a brief glimpse of Christine, sitting behind a mask of calm that Mary had grown to interpret over the years. There was an brittle quality to Christine's stance, a slight stiffening of her jaw that gave away her inner conflict. Mary swallowed hard, struggling to keep her own trembling hands from betraying her. For years, Mary had attempted to be the glue that kept the Brown family intact. She had always put harmony first, regularly quieting her doubts and fears to prevent argument. She had suffered behind-the-scenes heartbreaks, times when her instincts told her something was wrong, but she remained silent, hoping the family could be held together. Mary had been mediator, confidant, and guardian, making her way through the complicated balance of a polygamous family where feelings were a tangled mess and loyalties were multifaceted. She had learned that one misworded sentence, one bitter accusation, could create waves of strife that would take decades to repair. But the revelation of Christine's secret destroyed all of that painstakingly kept equilibrium. This was not a small omission or harmless mistake. This was a betrayal so profound that it came close to destroying the very fabric of the family Mary had struggled to keep intact. The secret was not only a violation of trust, but also a direct threat to the children she loved dearly. Mary's mind raced as she recalled the moment she had first uncovered the evidence. The hidden messages, the veiled conversations, the late-night whispers that finally revealed a truth she could no longer ignore. Each detail had cut through her like a knife, leaving wounds that throbbed with every heartbeat. Mary clenched her lips, resisting the tidal wave of emotions that teetered on the edge of engulfing her. She felt the gaze of the courtroom upon her, biding its time for her to open her mouth, to break down, or maybe to burst. But Mary was aware that today, she could not let her guard down. Her children's future depended on her composure. Their trust in her, and their sense of safety depended on her strength. With a deep, measured breath, she reminded herself that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. As she approached the front of the courtroom, Mary's mind flashed back to the countless times she had tried to maintain a fragile peace. She recalled the nights of dinner when tension lay just under the surface of polite chit-chat, the sleepless nights lying in bed, listening to muffled arguments she was deliberately omitted from, the silent prayers she prayed for wisdom, perspective, and protection. She recalled questioning herself, asking herself if she was being paranoid, wondering if her judgment was jaded by jealousy or insecurity. And yet, as the puzzle pieces clicked together, Mary realized that her gut had been correct. Christine had been keeping something huge under wraps, something that could no longer be hidden. The courtroom itself felt nearly suffocating, the high ceilings heightening the import of the moment. The air was filled with the smell of wood polish and slight hints of paper, but Mary hardly noticed. Her focus was solely on the task at hand, revealing the truth without letting her feelings overflow, being dignified as she uncovered years of lies. Each whisper of the crowd, each rustle of papers, each snapping of a camera shutter appeared amplified, pushing her deeper into the role she had long feared, but now was unable to avoid. Mary's fingers tightened around the folder she carried, the folder that contained the evidence that would finally illuminate the truth. Screenshots, texts, and testimonies, all meticulously compiled over weeks of painstaking effort, were now her armor, her voice, and her shield. She thought about how she had debated over every detail, every word, every potential consequence of exposing Christine. The stakes were high: family dynamics, public opinion, and the delicate emotional health of her children all were at risk. She breathed in again, sensing her heart slow just enough to concentrate. This wasn't confrontation. It was clarity. It was justice. And it was taking back control in a situation where lies had dominated for too long. Mary locked gazes with the judge, unflinching and unyielding. The judge's eyes were piercing, inquiring and analytical, as if weighing the depth of what was to happen next in silence. Mary knew she was not merely presenting the evidence. She was relating a story, one which deserved to be heard, understood and resolved. The tone in the room receded into the distance, as Mary pictured the children she cared for. Their innocence, trust, and sense of security were at risk. She had borne this secret alone for far too long, but now she finally had the guts to move, to stand up for what was right, and to face the deception directly. Mary knew the truth, however much it hurt, was the only route toward healing, not just for her but for the entire family. As she moved forward to the front, the gravity of the moment weighed heavy like never before. Her hands did not shake with fear anymore. They shook with purpose. Mary Brown, the reserved guardian, the peacemaker, the mother who had sacrificed everything to keep the peace, was about to emerge into the light. The secret that had fermented in the dark for so long would at last have the light of day. And Mary recognized, with a shiver of fear and determination, that the aftermath would reshape everything. But for the first time in years, there was a spark of hope that the truth would also offer a possibility of healing. The gavel came down on the polished wood of the judge's bench, with a force that seemed to shake Mary Brown's very essence. A hush dropped over the courtroom, thick and oppressive, as if everyone collectively held their breath, anticipating the tempest to brew. Mary stood up carefully, her fingers wrapped around the folder containing decades of secrets, hard-earned evidence, and truths no longer meant to be kept. She sensed every eye upon her, every camera eye tracking her every step, but not fear, a burning determination that flowed through her. "Your Honor," Mary began, her voice barely above a whisper at first, trembling with the weight of the moment. Then, as she looked at Christine across the room, her voice grew firmer, sharper, slicing through the tense atmosphere. "I've tried for years to protect this family, to shield my children and preserve the bonds we've built, but there is a truth that has been hidden, and it cannot be ignored any longer." Christine's composure faltered, ever so slightly, but it was enough for Mary to notice. She had seen that nervous tick before, the quick tightening of a jaw, the way Christine's eyes darted just a fraction too quickly. Mary's heart clenched, but she forced herself to stay calm. This was not the moment to wait. This was the moment to meet the betrayal, to expose the secret that had haunted her and poisoned the family for too long. Mary set the folder down gently on the stand, allowing it to thud softly onto the smooth surface. Within were screenshots of private messages, logs of conversations that had been intentionally concealed, and testimonials from family members who had personally seen events that defied Christine's public story. Each was a thread that, if pulled, would unravel the carefully woven veil of deceit. The courtroom held its breath, leaning in closer, the atmosphere charged with expectation. She caught her breath and went on, her voice rising just enough to demand notice without getting away from her. "Christine has been harboring a secret, one that impacts not only herself, but the entire family. The children, the siblings, and even the family's honor have all been tainted by her behavior." Whispers spread through the crowd. Some loudly gasped. Others gave uneasy glances. Mary felt the pressure of judgment, curiosity and shock weigh her down, but she never wavered. She had practiced these words 1,000 times. Not for herself, but for the children who needed to know the truth, and for the family she still clung to hopes of surviving this news. Christine's face went white. Her normally carefully constructed mask of composure was starting to crack under strain. Mary saw the telltale tremble of her hands, the faint quivering of her lips, the minute beads of sweat on her forehead. Each detail served to reinforce the knowledge Mary had all along. Christine's secret was more than a small white lie. It was a betrayal, with far-reaching consequences that no one had ever dreamed of. Mary continued presenting the evidence, piece by piece, allowing the weight of each revelation to sink in for everyone in the room. Screenshots of hidden messages illuminated the depth of deception, showing exchanges that contradicted Christine's claims and revealed hidden motives. Testimonies from family members corroborated Mary's suspicions, painting a picture of secrecy, manipulation, and a deliberate attempt to conceal the truth. As the court absorbed the evidence, Mary's emotions surged. She felt a mixture of righteous anger, sorrow, and even a flicker of relief. She had carried this burden in silence for too long, fearing the damage that exposing it might cause. But now, as the truth stood before everyone, she realized that honesty, even when painful, was the only path toward healing. The judge nodded forward, fingers interlocked, listening carefully. Mary was aware of the weight of the moment. The words she chose to use now would make a difference to the court's opinion, shape the verdict, and stamp itself permanently on the family's past. But even under the pressure, she felt a calm clarity she had not known in years. The secret, long suppressed, was finally coming into the light. Mary stopped, giving the room a moment to grasp the burden of her words. "We've all made efforts to shield one another," she whispered, but with no denial of power. "Yet lies, no matter how tiny, cannot bind a family. Christine's lie has a cost, and today we confront it, sides together, in the light of reality." The courtroom held its breath, save for the soft rustle of papers or discreet inhalation of air. The atmosphere was tense, a living, breathing entity that seemed to exert pressure upon every wall and every heart in attendance. Mary locked eyes with Christine, and did not falter, allowing the force of her words to settle. It was an engagement, not of facts, but of morality, trust, and the tenuous relationships of family. As the session went on, Mary shared more information, describing the subtle ways that Christine's secret had affected the family. There were nights of hushed arguments, mysterious disappearances, and the small building moments that had planted fear and suspicion. With each new revelation, Mary aimed not to shame, but to enlighten, to allow the truth, in all its brutal clarity, to be acknowledged at last. At the end of the session, Mary was a combination of drained and empowered. The climactic confrontation in the courtroom had tried her mettle, her cool, and her bravery. She had exposed a secret that had lain in the dark too long, and though the consequences were unpredictable, she knew she had acted right, for herself, for her kids, and for the possibility, no matter how tenuous, of a family that might one day mend. As Mary sat, the room filled with the hum of whispers. She pulled a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come on this emotional path. The battle had only just started, and the path forward promised more discoveries, more tension, and more emotional turmoil. But Mary was prepared. She had met the storm face on, and she would not look away now. The courtroom was heavy with tension, a tension that makes every hushed breath sound like thunder. Mary Brown leaned back in her chair, but she felt the weight of the revelations like a physical burden on her chest. It was no longer a matter of evidence or legal process. It was a battle with the ugliest kind of betrayal. Every word she had spoken in the previous session lingered in the room, echoing off the walls, and the faces around her reflected a mixture of shock, disbelief, and judgment. Tears pricked Mary's eyes as she thought about how long the secret had been festering, hidden behind polite smiles and hushed conversations. She recalled the many times she had felt that something was not right, the quiet hints she had attempted to brush aside in a bid to maintain peace. She had observed Christine playing the innocent act, all the while her own gut telling her that something was severely amiss. And now, with the truth stripped bare before the court, those misgivings had turned into a heart-wrenching reality. Emotionally, the cost was almost too much to bear. Mary's mind wandered briefly to her children, sitting quietly in the courtroom, sensing the gravity of what was happening. They didn't fully understand the intricacies of adult deception, but they understood the tension, the heartbreak in Mary's eyes, and the silent questions in her voice. She could feel their fear and confusion, and it intensified her own pain. This wasn't solely about revealing the truth about Christine. It was about shielding her children from further damage, from being ensnared in the snare of deceptions that had become so convoluted as to be impossible to deny. Mary remembered all those years spent in quiet commuting with doubt and suspicion, the restless nights, the fervent whispered prayers for wisdom, and the times she had doubted the reality she knew returned with full force. She reflected on the instances when she had remained quiet, hoping somehow the truth would emerge without destruction. But silence, she came to understand now, had only made the lie stronger. The truth had to emerge, however hurtful it was, for all concerned. As the judge reviewed the evidence, Mary's heart ached. This wasn't just about confronting Christine, it was about confronting the consequences of years of secrecy. She could feel the tension radiating from Christine, the way her hands fidgeted with the papers on her lap, the tightness in her shoulders, and the slight tremor in her voice when she finally spoke. It was all a reflection of the emotional weight Mary had known existed for so long. Mary's emotions surged as she recounted moments that had seemed insignificant at the time, but now, in the light of truth, revealed a pattern of deliberate deception. She described subtle manipulations, withheld information, and the careful construction of a facade that had kept the family in the dark. Each example brought fresh waves of pain, not just for the betrayal itself, but for the realization of how easily trust had been broken. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke, not out of fear, but out of the emotional toll of telling these painful realities. The courtroom fell silent, hanging on every sentence. Even the judge bent forward, listening intently, while onlookers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Mary recognized that the emotional impact of this case went far beyond her. It was affecting everyone in the room. Family dynamics, long-established relationships, and the tenuous sense of security that the children had based their lives on were all at risk. As Mary spoke, moments of her own courage came to the surface amidst the pain. She knew that although the deception had been crushing, the strength to act upon it had been liberating. She had done the unthinkable, revealed a secret that could destroy her family and endured in court. Cameras and witnesses, all silent witnesses. Mary knew that at times, emotional anguish was the cost of truth, and that truth was the only means to stop further pain. She breathed deeply, allowing herself to experience the rush of emotions without being overwhelmed by them. Anger at the deception, heartbreak at the harm that had been inflicted on the family, sorrow for the children who had unwittingly been trapped in the middle, and relief that the truth was finally emerging. Mary's eyes glistened with tears as she looked at Christine, who now appeared smaller somehow, vulnerable beneath the weight of exposure. Mary was aware that the toughest part was ahead. One fight was exposing the secret, but fighting the wake of it, the broken relationships, the public attention, the emotional damage would be another. But in that instant she permitted herself a glimmer of hope. By addressing the betrayal in the open, she was providing herself, her kids, and even possibly Christine, an opportunity to rebuild on the grounds of truth instead of lies. The courtroom was on tenterhooks. As Mary finished her testimony, she had exposed her very soul, not only the evidence, but also the emotional journey that led her to where she was now. Each sentence had been an agony and a strength, heartbreak and determination. She had revealed the secret, not in revenge, but in necessity, the necessity to keep her children safe, to regain her voice, and to face the truth that had tormented her for far too long. As the session closed, Mary sat silently, allowing herself to breathe for the first time in what felt like years. The emotional cost of the encounter had been tremendous, yet so had the sense of resolve it had imparted to her. She had weathered the tempest, and in the midst of the heartache, found a resilience she had not known she possessed within herself. Mary Brown understood that the road to come would be arduous, but for the very first time, she caught the faintest suggestion of hope, that truth, whatever the pain it held, was the way forward to healing. The courtroom was a living, breathing tempest of expectation. Every rustle of paper, every movement of a foot, every hushed conversation seemed amplified, the high ceilings making each sound ring out like the pulse of a relentless drum. Mary Brown sat in her chair, with her hands lightly grasping her folder, but with her whole body vibrating with tension. She'd done it all, presented the proof, laid out the secrets, and stood up to Christine with bravery. But now stood the most important moment of them all, the verdict. The judge sat back, fingers interlaced, eyes sweeping the courtroom with calculated purpose. The stillness was oppressive. Mary could feel her heart pounding, not merely from expectation, but because she understood the gravity of what hung in the balance. It wasn't only about Christine's secret, it was about the trust, the foundation, and the precarious equilibrium of the entire Brown family. The judge's one word would shift everything. For all of them. Mary's thoughts briefly drifted to her children, sitting quietly nearby. They were innocent in the midst of this storm, unaware of the depths of deception that had been festering behind the walls of their home. She reached over and gently squeezed their hands, a silent promise that no matter what happened, she would protect them. Her voice whispered in their ears, soft but firm, "We'll be okay, no matter what." That little action centered her, recalling to her the purpose she had struggled, so that the truth would finally be known. On the other side of the room, Christine sat stiff, her well-crafted facade of calmness starting to fray under the pressure of the court's gaze. Mary watched her intently, the faint shake in her hands, the tension in her jaw, and the tendency of her eyes to dart nervously towards the evidence presented to the judge. Each detail attested to what Mary had suspected from the very beginning. Christine's secret had repercussions, and the truth could no longer be evaded. As the judge studied the evidence, Mary thought back to the long road that had led her to this point. She recalled the sleepless nights of anxiety, the silent tears she cried in secret, the times she had doubted herself and her own judgment. She had borne the ache of suspicion for too long, but she had stayed on course, knowing that uncovering the truth was the only means of defending her family. The burden of responsibility weighed upon her, but rather than crush her, it hardened her determination. The air in the room was held in suspension as the judge spoke at last, his words slow and deliberate. "This court has most seriously considered the evidence that has been laid before it, and the testimony delivered. The gravity of this case cannot be overemphasized." Each sentence dripped like ice water, freezing Mary with the weight of what was happening. Her chest contracted, her throat swelling shut, as the tension rose to a near tolerable pitch. Mary's mind flashed back to the countless small betrayals, the hidden conversations, and the nights of unanswered questions. The secret Christine had kept was not merely a personal failing. It was a disruption that had threatened the emotional stability of the children, and shaken the trust that had taken years to build. Mary had confronted it not out of anger, but out of necessity, understanding that truth and transparency were the only paths toward eventual healing. The judge went on, his tone firm but unshakable. "Although the evidence indicates concealment of vital information, it is now essential that all concerned proceed in honesty, openness, and a fresh dedication to the well-being of the children concerned." Mary felt wash over her a wave of relief, mixed with the acid sting of the betrayal she had suffered. The decision did not take away the hurt, but it recognized the depth of the lie and offered a blueprint for healing. Mary took a slow breath, attempting to calm her thundering heart. The weeks, months of tension relaxing just a little, finally began to fade from her body. She knew the court's recognition of the secret was not a destination, that it was the first page of a new book, where honesty would be the cornerstone, and trust would have to be carefully restored. As the session concluded, Mary rose from her seat, her movements deliberate and composed. Cameras clicked, capturing the solemnity of the moment, but Mary's focus was inward. She thought of her children again, of the lessons they would carry about courage, integrity, and resilience. She understood that her role as a mother, protector, and truth-bearer was far from over. The verdict was in, but the road to healing, reconciliation, and rebuilding trust would be a long one after the courtroom was cleared. Mary took one last, deep breath and stepped out into the hall. The fluorescent lighting overhead, cold but bright, casting lengthy shadows across the waxed floors. She was tired, relieved, and determined. The argument had hurt, had been emotionally draining and public but necessary. She had confronted the lies directly, addressed the emotional dishonesty, and now stood with the power of truth behind her. At each step, Mary learned something profound. Courage wasn't just facing confrontation, it was surviving the consequences, taking the lessons with her, and standing strong in the face of unknowing. She had made the first, most essential step back to reclaiming her voice and defending the family she loved, even though the road ahead would be full of difficulty. With the courtroom clearing and the whispers of onlookers filling the air, Mary felt the pressure of history weighing upon her shoulders. She understood that the family would never remain the same, but for the first time in years, there was a sense of clarity, honesty, and an opportunity to rebuild. The decision had drawn near. The storm had blown over for the time being, and Mary Brown had come out not broken, but indomitable, prepared to meet whatever lay ahead with strength and determination. The gavel came down the last time, echoing through the courtroom like a heartbeat, and then silence. Mary Brown caught her breath as the judge's words hung there, weighty, impactful, and irrevocably true. The verdict had been spoken, and though it couldn't undo the years of dishonesty, it honored the betrayal, acknowledged the bravery, and opened the way for honesty and accountability in the future. Mary felt her chest heave, as tears pricked her eyes. Relief, sorrow, and exhaustion mingled inside her like a storm breaking into calm sunlight. She had fought so hard to bring the truth to light, to protect her children, and to reclaim her voice. And now the storm had subsided enough to see the first rays of clarity. The court that had appeared constricting and stifling mere minutes ago was now a room of freedom, where truth had momentarily burst out of the shadows. Christine was across the room, her complexion wan, her composure at last broken. Mary did not experience triumph or cruelty. She experienced a quiet, determined, knowing that honesty had finally been returned. The secret, which had long been buried, had repercussions, yes, but addressing it had been unavoidable. Mary knew that revealing the truth wasn't about retribution. It was about protection, simplicity, and the chance to heal, even if that road to healing would be lengthy and convoluted. Mary looked at her children, who stood by with wide, bewildered eyes. She got down on one knee for a moment to grasp their hands, speaking softly in comfort and reassurance. "We'll be fine," she murmured, her voice shaking but firm. "The truth is out, and now we can go forward." And in that instant, she knew something deep within her. The battle had never been about her alone. It had always been for them, the children who were worthy of honesty, security, and a family on the basis of truth and not lies. As she rose and began to walk out of the courtroom, Mary felt a mixture of exhaustion and empowerment. Every step echoed in the polished hallways, carrying the weight of history, of revelation, and of resilience. The cameras clicked, and the murmurs of onlookers followed, but Mary's mind was focused inward. She had faced the storm, confronted betrayal, and emerged with a clarity that few ever achieve. Mary considered the future, not hers alone, but that of the family she still loved and hoped could find healing. She knew the journey would be tough. Trust once lost is hard to repair. Relationships would take time, patience, and understanding. Still, for the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope. Hope that honesty would restore what secrecy had sought to destroy. Hope that her children would be able to grow up to understand that courage and truth always prevail. And hope that the family, despite change, might regain a new equilibrium. Her gaze flicked over Christine's once more. Then she departed the room. No anger burned in her expression now, only calm acceptance that actions always had consequences, and that the only way was forward through honesty, no matter how painful. Mary realized that Christine also had a decision to make: take responsibility, and possibly over time, attempt to rebuild what had been broken. Outside the courtroom, the sunlight hit Mary's face, warm and unforgiving, yet oddly comforting. She inhaled deeply, letting the fresh air fill her lungs, washing away some of the tension that had built over months, years even. This was a new beginning, a chance to redefine the family on her terms, with integrity and courage as the foundation. Mary knew that things would never be the same again, but the clarity of mind that she had struggled so desperately to obtain gave her strength, focus, and the determination to go on. Mary's steps grew firmer now, each of them a testament to resilience.
She had confronted deception, betrayal, and inner turmoil face on, and had not snapped. Instead, she had come out stronger, wiser, and without fear of standing in the light of truth. She had regained her voice, shielded her children, and proved that courage is not gauged by the fights you don't fight, but by the storms you weather. As she watched the courthouse doors shut behind her, Mary Brown sensed a quiet, unshakable feeling of empowerment. The past could not be erased, the secret could not again be kept, and the wounds would heal with time. But she had established one unquestionable fact. Courage comes from speaking the truth, from unflinching bravery, and from refusing to stay silent in the face of betrayal. Mary understood that the road ahead would still challenge her, but she also understood that she was prepared. A new day lay before her, a day where she could keep her children safe, maintain her dignity, and raise a family that, though battered, could perhaps, in time, be stronger than it had ever been before. And with that, Mary walked on, away from the courtroom, with the unshakable knowledge that she had endured the storm and lived.